North Carolina loses out to Alabama again, only this time it wasn't on the court.
You are Locked On Tar Heels, your daily podcast on the UNC Tar Heels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? It's Sunday, May 5th, 2024, Cinco de Mayo. Welcome into this live edition of the Locked On Tar Heels podcast, the only daily North Carolina show out there. This actually is our Monday show, but with the Cliff Omoruyi news coming out today on Sunday, I thought it would be really important for us to go ahead and just do this live today so that we can join together, talk about it, unpack it, figure out where to go next. You're joining us at the place to get your Tar Heels content every single day. I do want to thank each and every one of you for making us your first listen or watch of the day. Special shout out to all you everydayers out there. Also special shout out to all the members of the Locked On Tar Heels Discord community. I'm your host, Isaac Shade, and it's good to be with you. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. Game off. We got to talk more about Monopoly Go. This fast-paced game lets you team up with friends for tournaments to unlock awesome prizes like unique stickers for trading, cool playing pieces, and hilarious emojis for taunting your friends. So download Monopoly Go right now, free on Google Play or on the App Store. Game on. Coming up on the show today, we're going to talk about Cliff Omoruyi choosing Alabama over Carolina. We're going to talk about why that may have happened. How do we reckon with all of that? We're going to talk about where to go next, and we're going to look at, okay, what about other things, even beyond the center position, because Carolina's still got other things they're looking at. So all that coming up on the show today. There's a lot of you in the comments as well. Make sure you drop your questions in there because we will definitely circle around to those at the end of the show today. All right, so we knew that Cliff Omoruyi would be picking on Sunday. He is the transfer center from Rutgers, and we knew that it was down to North Carolina, along with Alabama, Kansas State, and Georgetown. I think most people assumed that it would either be the Crimson Tide or the Tar Heels, with all due respect to Georgetown and K-State, but that's just what it felt like it came down to. I got to tell you, much like many of you, just by North Carolina getting that final visit, by Omoruyi coming to Chapel Hill late last week, I felt good about things, at least the fact that he had come. I don't necessarily feel like I felt like, oh, Carolina's going to win. It's just felt better in the fact that he did actually come to North Carolina for a visit. And I tell you, the more I read about Cliff as a person, the more I watched his story, I started to get my hopes up. He felt like a Carolina type guy, but ultimately he chooses not to come to Carolina. So Cliff, you got my hopes up, Cliff, and now you didn't come. And that means that Carolina has now not only lost on Cliff Omoruyi, but have also lost with varying levels of interest from Carolina, some of which we'll probably never fully know, have lost on Omoruyi, on Tennessee transfer Jonas Adou, on Umar Ballo from Arizona, on Maxime Reynaud, on Danny Wolf. You know, who knows how many other like kind of behind the scenes conversations there have been, but Carolina ultimately cannot land any of these guys, or does not land any of these guys at least. And so look, let me just say this where we're at today, because I know there, from seeing comments on social media and in the Locked On Tar Heels Discord, and even here early on our stream, it's clear that there's thoughts and emotions all over the place. Some people are frustrated, hurt, angry, disappointed. Some people just about the decision itself. Some people are all in on, why can't Carolina land anybody? Are there problems with recruiting? Are there problems with not being able to prepare people for the NBA? There are other parts of the fan base that all along have said, Jalen Washington, I feel great with him as the starting five. I don't even know why we're concerned. And anywhere in between. So there's all of this that's out there right now. And we'll get to that what's next of it here in a little bit. But here's what I specifically want to say about not landing Cliff Omoruyi. The focus specifically on him has become an issue of supply and demand. Why? Because with all these other guys off the board, frankly, Cliff Omoruyi was probably the last dynamic game-changing center available, the last uber athletic guy that's out there with his level of capability and talent. Yes, there are other guys in the NBA draft right now that might pull out and come back, some of them in the portal, some of them not, right? And so because of that, previous to Cliff Omoruyi, it had felt like there were so many possibilities out there that it's like, if one would go off the board, you say, that's okay. There's these 4 other guys that Carolina could ostensibly land. We'll be fine. But because it has been down to Cliff Omoruyi now, I think that's why so many folks have gotten really tied up in knots about this one of like, Cliff Omoruyi or bust. If we don't land Cliff, I don't know what we're due. We're up the creek without a paddle. And I resonate with that. I hear that. I have definitely felt some of that myself of like, oh boy, this feels like a hard reset that Carolina has to go to now. And so I think that is, if I can identify and pinpoint why this miss feels so big, is that's why an issue of supply and demand. But also, I mean, it really is like high school recruiting in this way. You've heard me say multiple times leading up to this, you don't have to hit on everyone. In fact, you can't and won't hit on everyone. You just got to get one yes. And so while it feels like today, here, right now, Carolina has missed out on literally everyone, there's a lot ahead. Because remember, right now, we sit here, as we record today, it's May 5th. As you're listening to this later, maybe on audio, it's May 6th or whenever it is. And we got to recognize that November is a bunch of months away, like 6 months away. And there's a lot that can and will happen between now and then. Here's an example. Cam Spencer was indispensable for what UConn did on their way to the national championship game this year. He didn't become a UConn Husky till, midsummer or whenever it was. I don't have the exact date in front of me, but it just, even though it feels like a lost cause right now, I mean, there's a lot of hopeless chatter out there, and I get that and I understand it. But just remember, there's a lot of days ahead of us until this roster is complete. And ultimately, here's the thing. Think about what Coach Davis has said over and over and over again. He wants guys that want to be Tar Heels. He wants to find guys that don't need the money and the whatever, and it's not becoming a bidding war. And look, I don't want you to hear me saying like I'm trying to mitigate losing Cliff Omoruyi. Clearly Carolina wanted him and put a lot of effort into him. I don't want to, try to do the thing where you pretend like, oh, we really didn't want him, because that's not reality either. Carolina and us as out here covering and being fans of and watching this team, yeah, we wanted Cliff Omoruyi, and it hurts to not get him. But Coach Davis has said repeatedly that he wants guys that want to be in Chapel Hill, that want to be Tar Heels. And so if what Cliff Omoruyi heard was not what he wanted to hear, and he ultimately chooses Alabama, then no amount of money was worth it to land him, because he didn't ultimately buy what Carolina was selling, and that ain't a Tar Heel. It felt like he could have been. I believed that, and I thought it could be a thing, but it turned out to not be. And so off you go to Tuscaloosa. Good luck. Have fun. I hope it's a good year for the Crimson Tide. But Hubert Davis is recognizing well that even though transfer portal recruitment has become very transactional in a lot of ways, more so than fit and other things like that, Hubert Davis is not going to sacrifice fit for dollars for getting what seems like it might be the right guy. Because team chemistry, as we identified last year over and over and over again, is infinitely more important than a hired gun or somebody that just comes in that isn't all in on the Tar Heels. And I'll use UConn as an example again. You've probably heard Dan Hurley talk about this now and the way they're going about looking at who they're getting and who they're trying to bring in. It's infinitely more important for culture and fit and character. And if that's not what Cliff Omoruyi wanted, then I don't want Cliff Omoruyi. When I woke up this morning, I would have said differently, right? But if he doesn't want to be a Tar Heel, then the Tar Heels don't need him. So it's just all of that to keep your eyes out on, because, if what's being reported is true about the numbers that this thing got driven up to, I've heard reports on both sides of Carolina was the highest bidder. I've heard that Alabama was the highest bidder. Joe Tipton reported that some non-Alabama team offered Omoruyi $2 million. And I don't even know if that's one of the three finalists, whether it's Carolina, Kansas State, or Georgetown, or somebody else that wasn't even in the mix. He's just reporting that. But if those are the numbers that it's getting up to, then we've got to continue having this whole conversation about the landscape of this whole thing, because it's just so absurd what the numbers are. But if what Carolina was offering, whatever that number was, with the chance to be a Tar Heel, with the chance to be probably the starting center on what would then look like a national championship caliber team, if that wasn't enough for you, then nothing was ever going to be enough. And good luck to you in Tuscaloosa. That's where I'm at. But the question does become, if Omoruyi's not the guy, then who is? We got to continue to look at those options. I posed this as a hypothetical last week, and now it's reality. So we're going to have to look at it, and we'll do that in just a second. Right after I tell you that this episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs, which has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. It's not just some job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else. Even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to that perfect role. Well, in a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is constantly finding new ways to help make the process easier. They even just recently launched a new feature that helps you write job descriptions to take some of this hard work off of your plate. I love that, making this process much more easier and also quicker. So post your job for free right now at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Again, that's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right. So the next part of this conversation that we now have to have is, I think a lot of people were assuming, all right, it's Cliff Omoruyi. Let's start looking elsewhere to the power forward position, filling that up. And we'll do that here in just a minute. But now we have to live in the reality that Cliff Omoruyi, like multiple of these other centers before him, is out the door and off to another school. And so here's what we have to do now, just like in high school recruiting. And maybe that's another part of why this is different. And I didn't say this in the first part, but in high school recruiting, so many fewer people are paying attention to it specifically. And so when you miss on a recruit, it's just like, all right, cool, on to the next thing. It's harder to do it in the transfer portal era because it's right in everyone's face right after the NCAA tournament. And you're looking at all this and it's just much more in the public eye. And so to me, that's part of why this is a tougher pill to swallow as well. I should have gone ahead and said that, but I'll say it now. Okay, but here's what we have to be able to do. Be frustrated, be disappointed. Okay, I'm with you. That's where I'm feeling right now. But you also then take that and say, all right, Cliff, we got to set you aside and we got to move on to the very next thing. Because that's what you do in competition, right? As a baseball player, for me growing up, as a hitter, if I strike out, all right, cool. Next play. What do I got to learn? What did I learn from that at bat? On to the next thing. How can I be a better hitter? How can I better learn what this pitcher is trying to do to me? How can I get into the field and not let that at bat affect me defensively? That's what we're talking about right here, right now, is that you miss on a guy. All right. Did we do everything that we wanted to do? Did we operate within our recruiting procedures and how we feel like we're best fit for North Carolina? If so, no regrets, wipe your hands and move on. But maybe there's something to learn and you can. But here's the reality where we're at right now. North Carolina has a very, very, I was going to say solid, I'm going to say elite backcourt, because you've got your 3-man rotation from the backcourt last year and RJ Davis, Elliot Cadeau, and Seth Trimble. And you add into that Ian Jackson, and then out on the wing, you add in Cade Tyson, you add in Drake Powell, and then you've still got these other guys, that Jalen Withers, who can play the 4, Aiden High, who can play the 4. You bring in James Brown, and along with Jalen Washington at the 5. And so if this is the lineup it's going to be and things don't change, which it will, we'll continue to talk about that in a second. But if I was having to roll today, I might even, and this is going to be the first time I've said this, so bear with me because this is new for me. I would go Elliot and RJ at the 1 and the 2, obviously. But there is a world in which if Carolina doesn't end up getting another big and they say, you know what, we got to rethink this whole thing. What if Jalen Washington is our starting 5? And I know a lot of you have been clamoring for that, and I hear you. This is where we're at as a possibility right now. If Jalen Washington is our starting 5, is there a world in which you considered Cade Tyson as your 4 and Ian Jackson at the 3? I think a lot of that depends on how well they both adjust. For Ian Jackson, adjusting from high school to the college game, we've seen incoming freshmen do that to varying degrees of success. With Cade Tyson, how well would he adjust not only coming from Belmont to North Carolina, but also similar to Harrison Ingram last year, had been told, hey, we're recruiting you as a small forward. Would you go play the 4? Would you play the power forward? That would be North Carolina looking at things differently than they've planned on doing. But it's a world in which on offense, that offense would be elite if everything translates as you expect it to do. Defense, that's where I think Carolina would struggle with that lineup. You know, that's something you got to do. But would a lineup like this, it doesn't have to be exactly this, but this is what I'm proposing. Would that be an opportunity to spread things out more than you've done? Completely unclog the lane. You don't have an Armando like you've had, but also you don't have a Nomori or a Ballo or, you know, any of those bigger guys driving lanes for Elliott, driving lanes for RJ, for Ian, where he shines, right? And then you kick out. That's a possibility, but it's also similar to that's where Duke suffered, for example, this past year. Flip was their 5. They didn't have like a Derek Lively like they had the year before. And to me, that was part of Duke's undoing this year. So it just all depends. Do you feel strongly enough like you can do that with the Jalen Washington? If so, awesome. But even then, hear me say this, even then in that world, if you do decide that Jalen Washington is your starting 5, you got to have more depth behind him than James Brown, Zayden High, small ball Jalen Withers. Like that just doesn't work. So that's where I'm at right now is even if in losing out on Omori, you say, okay, Jay Wash, it's you, buddy. You're the starting 5. You still got to have somebody behind him that is a better and more experienced player than what Carolina currently would have behind him. And look, you know, you think about, I know you don't have to go up against DJ Burns. That's the archetype I've been using for, hey, with Armando Bacot in the lineup, you can go in there and bang a little bit with Burns. And even honestly, Armando couldn't live up to that or hold up to that all the time because Burns is just so big. Jay Wash certainly couldn't. And you think, well, Burns is gone. Who has like that type of center this day and age? Syracuse. They just got Eddie Lampkin in the transfer portal, who comes from Colorado and Kansas State before that. And you look at it and you think, boy, that's a big boy. And Carolina right now has literally no one on their roster that could live up to that or hold up to that. So that's where it's at. That's what we have to think about. Now, a second option. I truly think that Carolina is going to continue to look at options at the 5. Who could we go get? At this point, though, you might be thinking about it not necessarily as a prototypical 5, because again, there really is not some elite rim protector out there now that Adou, Omori, Ballo, those kind of guys are off the board. So do you look at someone like Coleman Hawkins from Illinois, who has, you know, Coach Kilby and I talked about some of these guys earlier this week, but we were specifically more talking about the 4. But Coleman Hawkins, do you think about him as a 5? If he comes out of the NBA draft, do you put some money at him? Is he a Carolina guy? Another option, another possibility. One of the guys that had been crystal balled to Alabama was Kentucky big man transfer, 7-footer, by the way, Ugonna Onyenso. Do you just basically say, well, okay, Omori's gone to Tuscaloosa. Hi, Ugonna, we're the Tar Heels. I would have that conversation. He's a pretty prototypical 5, but kind of a modern version of that. Somebody that I know Norchad Omier. It seems like he's essentially down to St. John's and Baylor and is deciding this week. I'm going to make him tell me no. I'm going to call Norchad Omier and say, is there anything we can do? Because we have seen you play at Miami the past 2 seasons, and we think you could add a lot to what the Tar Heels are doing. I'm having that conversation. Akor from Samford. Probably all of us saw him against Kansas in the NCAA tournament last year. If not, go back and watch Samford's games last year. He's a fun player. I would at least have a conversation with him. Is he, capable enough, athletic enough, a good enough basketball player to move from the SoCon up to the ACC? You got to make those determinations. I'm not sure. What about JT Toppin from New Mexico? An undersized 5, a non-shooting 5. But if you're thinking about him as the 5 rather than the 4, it's a possibility. It's an option. Coach Pack and I had talked when we were on the show last week about Kashawn Pryor from South Florida. I really like his game. Could he be in the mold of a 5 for Carolina? Or do you even continue considering him for the 4? And so this to me is where things are at right now for the Tar Heels. Is you're either thinking Jay Wash is our guy, and then we need to find somebody that we would consider a backup to him. Or you could think, all right, what about any of these other guys? Do we think any of them are better and more capably fit with our team to be a starting 5 over and above Jalen Washington? Or do you say we're going to completely rethink this thing and almost restructure the way we play differently? And that's what good coaching does. And I think Hubert Davis is up to that task, man. He wants to run a fun offense. And this is where your coaching mettle is tested. Can you rise to the occasion of potentially having to rethink the way your team plays based on the personnel that year? We're going to find out much more ahead in the days and weeks and months to come. And that's part of why it's important to say this, because there are still days, weeks, and months yet to come. That's where we look at it right now. So that's been the conversation about the 5. There's, I think it's like, okay, you've landed Cade Tyson. Now you've landed Cliff Omoruyi, if that had happened today. And now you can turn your attention solely to the power forward, the 4 position. But now both of these are still up in the air. But you got to continue to think about the power forward position and if you feel set there or not. We're going to do that in just a second. Right after I tell you about Monopoly Go. Hey, look, game off. We got to pause right here to talk more about Monopoly Go, and I know what you're saying. Isaac, flag on the play. You already talked about that multiple times in the last couple of weeks. But look, there's so much good stuff in this game, folks. We got to keep talking about it. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for timed tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you can unlock. And there's so many to get, like unique stickers that you can trade with your friends to complete albums for big prizes. They've got cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, and hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton of these include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure. And there's always new timed events to help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, so go get off the bench, download it now for free on the Google Play or App Store. Game on. All right, we want to continue to think about the 4 position. I want to give you a quick weekend wrap up. There hasn't been very much, but there was some action this weekend. And then I want to maybe take a couple questions or comments from the chat. There's a ton of them, so we probably won't be able to filter through it because it's just me cycling through looking. Okay. As of right now, Carolina, you'll remember, I'm not pulling up the scholarship chart today, but has utilized 10 of their 13 scholarships. And so if Cliff Omoruyi had said, yes, I'm in, that would have been 11. You got 2 left. But now it's okay. Well, let's stop and reconsider the power forward position. There has not been much news on the Adou Thiero front in recent days. And so to me right now, while you restack the cards, whatever you analogy you want to use at the center position, I think right now you go back to an all-out blitz on Adou Thiero if he's your guy. Some of those other guys we just talked about in the last segment, they might also actually be your guy at the 4. So in this modern era, there's a bunch of different ways to look at and think about that. Like Kashawn Pryor, for example. I would love him at the 4. But as far in as you are on Adou Thiero, which how funny would it be? I just thought about this, to land both Adou Thiero and Ugonna Onyenso. So it's like, all right, Kentucky, come on over to Carolina, right? But then truly, if you can go ahead and grab somebody at the 4, like a Thiero, and I'm sure we'll hear more about this, especially now that the Omoruyi saga is over. What if you could go ahead and get that 4 and then really turn your attention to the 5? And it's like, hey, whoever you are, you're literally the last missing piece to make this roster a national champion contender. I mean, that's a great way to be able to sell that and go about it and look at it. So we'll continue to think about that as well. So let's quickly turn to our weekend whip around so that we can then get to questions from all of you guys. A reminder, baseball was off this weekend. We're getting into what's the next to the last week of the regular season. They host Campbell tomorrow, Tuesday, and then host Louisville this coming weekend. So we'll keep our eyes on that. Softball was off this weekend as well. The ACC tournament for them starts this week. Both tennis teams were in action this weekend, kicking off their postseason. The women's heels, man, they just continue to roll even without Reese Brantmeyer. In the first round, they blanked Navy 4-0. And then that was on Friday. Yes. And then yesterday, blanked Wisconsin 4-0 in the second round. So now they're on to the Sweet 16. More to come on opponent, time and date, and all that. Men's tennis, unfortunately, lost 4-3. I mean, just a tight match in their first round matchup. Women's golf, they start the NCAA regionals today at Auburn. So keep your eyes out for that information. All right, gang, want to look at the comments and see if we can flood through some of these, because I would love to hear some of what you're wanting to ask and talk about. And again, there are a basic crud ton, and so we're going to get to that. Let me get all the way back to the top because there is a ton. Lamar Davis says, Isaac, there is a pattern here with these big men. Is it just that we're not going to pay these transfers millions like others, or is it something else? Has playing for UNC been devalued for money? Lamar, here's the funny thing. It could be a little bit of all of these things that you're asking about. I think to some level, because of Coach Davis's commitment to want to land cultural fit guys, which is not a bad thing, Carolina is not going to just say, all right, we'll ante up to everybody just because that's what you're asking for. Not that they're unwilling to pay anything at all, because that's the landscape right now. It's just that Carolina's not, at some point, they're not going to get into a bidding war with schools. That's just not who they're going to be. There could be other things. There could be a level of development. Obviously, for example, Omoruyi said, I'm going to Alabama because I believe it's the best option for my NBA development. Look, that's in the eye of the beholder, if we're being honest. And so if he thinks that's there, great. If he wants to think that Sean May and others on the Carolina staff would have been better, that's cool too. Some guys look at it as who's actually gone to the league, but you can't just base that upon development, right? Because sometimes getting to the league is just about, you were already there. Like all these Kentucky guys that have been one and done in and out, they were already there when they came in. That's not necessarily about Kentucky developing them. So that's part of it as well. And then to the question of, has playing for UNC been devalued for money? If that's true of North Carolina, that's true across the board, Lamar, if we're being honest about it, right? Does that make sense? Like, just from a logical standpoint, if playing for Carolina has been devalued for money, then it would also be true at Kansas and Duke and Kentucky and UConn and everywhere else. And so it's just a weird era. Part of it, what it does is spread the talent around. So I wouldn't even just say that playing at UNC has been devalued for money. It seems like playing anywhere for some has been devalued for money. There are going to still be young men that value fit and character and development over the bag. And so I hope we can be okay with that, recognizing that we're going to miss out some because of that. Hey, I want to give some love to my guy, the Nintendo Nerd, because he has consistently said, and I'm going to shout him out here, I've believed in Jay Wash from the start. He's going to prove all the doubters wrong. And if this is what it takes for that to happen, then so be it. And Nintendo, I want to shout out Nintendo, who's been with Locked On Tar Heels for a long time. He's a great member of the Locked On Tar Heels Discord community. And so want to say that this is true. He has been consistent and unwavering in his love for Jay Wash. And his point is very strong here. Because, you know, like in math class, how your teacher wants you to show how you got where you got. And it's like not just good enough to get the answer right. You got to have done it the correct way. Sometimes you back your way into something and it seems like that was your plan all along and you just kind of got lucky. I'll go back to Cam Spencer with UConn, right? Like that was a late ad that wasn't like, this is who we're targeting. This is who we're going after, who, by the way, was a former teammate of Cliff Omoruyi at Rutgers. And so it's like, if it turns out that Jay Wash is the guy and he blows up and has a dynamic year, as Nintendo says, if this is what it takes for that to happen, then so be it. And that's a great point, Nintendo. Like it could be that Jay Wash ends up just being an absolute dude, and we all have that. And so we'll see what happens there. John Hooker says we could add a Toppin. I really do like JT Toppin. I know he's not much of a shooter, but if it's the right fit of pieces, I think he could be really good. And the Utah State big body, post by some combinations. The Utah State big body is a guy we haven't mentioned on the show today, and his name is Great Osibor, who had a great year, forgive me for that, at Utah State this past year. Was really, really, really good. The problem is he, similar to Norchad Omier, is already deep into conversations with other schools, undersized like Norchad Omier is, but obviously and clearly a dude. And so somebody that I'm all about, same thing as Omier, force a conversation, force him to tell you no. And so I would look at it that way. I'm just going to do a big scroll, see who we can land with. And you know what? Our time is short, so we probably need to get out of here. Actually, we're past 30 minutes, and that's always our goal, is to get to 30 minutes. So here's something critically important for me to say. We say it every show, but it's important to say it today too, because I know there are a lot of people who are down and out and frustrated. It's always a great day to be a Tar Heel. That's going to be proven right, even through this disappointment. So folks, do not be out on these Tar Heels. Continue to stick with them, stick with Hubert Davis. He will get it done. I promise you that one way or another, this team is going to be great. We'll talk again tomorrow. There's going to be more to unpack. We'll see what that news is. But until then, peace.